enjoy this talk given at the Austin Center for Spiritual Living, where we live and teach the principles of science of mind and spirit. For more information, visit austincsl.org.
Well, good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to tell a story. Or actually, I'm going to relate some elements of a story that is a whole lot more complicated than what I'm going to present. I say complicated, involved, many, many more details. It's the story of Job. Many of you know Job, not pronounced Job, but Job. Job is one of my favorite characters in the Old Testament, and the reason that I don't do this very often with, just take a scripture and the whole sermon is about the scripture. I certainly do quote scripture from time to time, which I really enjoy. But Job is worth talking about totally. And he's one of those characters that has so many different facets to his personality that it's kind of hard to decide just what it is you want to look at. Job his story is the story of virtually every one of us. Because, you see, he complains, he suffers, he moans and he groans, he's arrogant, he knows it all, he's always right. Now, maybe some of you can't relate to that, or maybe you can relate to certain aspects of it. But the other thing about Job is that he's a very virtuous person. He is a guy that is constantly uplifted and has this incredible sense of himself. Job is... How would I put this? He, in one sense, one of the characteristics of him is that, to top it all off, he's constantly, self-righteously struggling to prove that his faults, his troubles, are somebody else's fault. There's lessons for this in all of us. I want to start by reading a little bit of something of the story of Job, and you'll get a picture of him right away. This is the first verse in the book of Job. I got my floppy Bible with me. You ever watch television preachers and they have a floppy Bible? It's really impressive. Well, I got a floppy Bible. I don't point as much as some of them do, but and it's black. It's not red like some of them. But at any rate, my floppy Bible says, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And that man was the greatest of all the men in the East." Wow. That's Job. You get a picture of him. He is the greatest in the land, as that says. Now, looking at that portrait, the stage is set. And so very often, when we see a portrait or a description of somebody like that, we know that there's something somewhere along the line that may need to be addressed. It goes on a little bit here, and the story really begins at about this point. He's talking about his sons, and he says, "And it came about, when the days of feasting have completed their cycle, that Job would send and consecrate them," his sons, "rising up early in the morning and offering burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, 'Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts.' Thus did Job continually." So you see, Job is not only this upright individual, not only one to really be acknowledged and looked to as an example of life, but he is so pure and good and knowledgeable that he is willing to make up for the sins of his children before they even sin. So you see a little bit here of perhaps what we might call some arrogance entering into this personality of Job. Let's stop for just a moment and look at the words. In the name Job and the place Uz that he came from, In the Old Testament especially, but throughout the Bible, New Testament too, you'll find in the Old Testament that many of the place names, proper names, and other words that are used are really symbolic. Numbers are also symbolic. We're not going to get into a lot of that today. But names often have meanings. Now, names among us, the kind of names that we commonly use here, have meanings also. But they're deep meanings and sometimes multiple connotations to a name. Like the name Job means, if you look it up and examine it, it means that it means persecuted, afflicted, and it also means returning or coming back. When you talk about the Job story, you could maybe entitle it The Comeback Kid, Job. So those are the meanings there. He also claimed or it is claimed, that he came from the land of Uz. And the land of Uz, or Uz, I tried to look up the correct pronunciation, and I can't find it. It literally means settled, firm, and secure. So here is this guy who's destined by his name, his nature, to be persecuted, to be afflicted, but also to come back through it all. And part of the reason is he lives in this secure, firm, settled land of Uz. This is all consciousness. All these things that we say that come out of the Bible, names and places and so forth, think of them as, and I will point that out as we go on, at least some of them, think of these as pertaining to him and his consciousness. He lives in a consciousness of being secure, but at the same time, there is this tendency toward his having to deal with adversity in his life. Now, so let's summarize just a little bit here on Job. He's self-righteous. He's secure in his possessions. He's certainly very secure in his attitudes. He's very pious, arrogantly so at times. And Job, however, is very loyal to God. He recognizes his source. And the one thing that is the greatest sin of all sins is to curse God. Job never disowns God in any way. He recognizes God as his only source, and he doesn't curse God. This sets the stage for a real drama, because there's a great test about to come on to Job. See, the angels, God, the Lord, called all the angels together in heaven for a conference. I guess they were going to do some kind of a workshop and experiential exercises. And they got to talking. Oh, and Satan shows up at this also. Because remember, he was Satan, Lucifer, he was an angel. So he shows up there, and God is going on talking about various things. And he says, and look, I want you to look at Job down there. Job is the best. Job stands out among all. He's upright. He's pure of heart. And he goes on and on and on and on. And finally, Satan is listening to this, and he said to, now mind you, all of these are levels of consciousness that I'm talking about. And they're within each of us. Satan, the adversary, the negative thinking. And Satan pops up and says, he ain't so much. Look at him. He's got all that stuff. He's living a good life. He's living a high life. You take that away from Job, and he will curse you in a New York second. It's put a little bit differently in the Old Testament. But God looks at him and says, okay, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn him over to you. And you can take everything away from Job. Just don't do him any bodily harm. And let's see what he does then. So, Satan then does put Job through a series of trials and tribulations, and disasters happen in his life, and messengers come to Job at various times to tell him what the latest disaster is, and each one of the messengers says to him, he says, I just barely got away. I'm the last one left. He loses all of his livestock. He loses all of his properties. He loses even his family, but not his wife. His wife factors into this a little bit later in a particular way. And he's left with nothing. And this is how it's related here after all this has happened. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all of this, Job did not blame God, did not curse God. And so God says to Lucifer, he says, see, I told you. He says, yeah, but you didn't do him any bodily harm. He says, if you were to do some bodily harm, he would really turn on you and curse you. And he says, okay, I give you the power to do bodily harm to Job. Don't kill him, but you can do bodily harm to Job. And so Satan then inflicts upon Job terrible, terrible things. And we have a description of Job, being decimated and breaking out in boils. And as it's put in one account that I read somewhere, here he is on his ash heap. You got to be careful with that. He's on his ash heap, decimated, scratching his boils with a shard remaining from the destruction of his properties and all. And this just goes on. Poor old guy. And then, to top it off, Job, he's decimated, but he won't give up and he won't curse God. And finally, his wife shows up. Now the wife, don't misunderstand this, and this is not sexist. And I want to point out that the wife represents the inner subconscious level of awareness, the accumulation of feelings and beliefs based in human conditioning. This is something that's speaking to Job himself. And she says to him, look, honey, I think you ought to just give it up and die. Just let go and die. Now, he probably had a fat insurance policy, and she would just, But, Job, he wouldn't do that. He would not give it up, curse God, as she suggested that he do, and go ahead and die. Now, I want to stop here for just a moment, and I want to comment a little bit on Satan and what we mean by Satan. The word Satan comes from an Aramaic word, sata. And sata means the adversary, the liar, the opposer, the accuser. It connotes sinfulness, like missing the mark. This is where there is a belief in some kind of an outside force that is constantly causing a disconnection and all. But that's the mentality of Satan, that represents an outside force, and so or attributes things to some kind of an outside force. And so very often that is the story of our life. It is, I didn't do it, Satan did it. The devil made me do it. We've heard that. Some of us grew up with that kind of a mentality. The devil represents, or Satan represents, mistaken thinking, erroneous thinking. But Job, he's pretty well rooted in the idea that God is my source. And then he says something that you can see there's something else working within him. And this is one of the most famous statements to come out of the Bible, and many of you will recognize it, where he says, that which I feared has come upon me. That's where it comes from. That which I feared has come upon me. Now, it's interesting when you think about this, because he's talking about the law of attraction. That to which we give our attention is what we are going to actually pull into our experience. And in this particular case, he's giving his attention to that which he feared, and that is what comes to him. And you think that the enlightenment would have come to him at that particular time, but it doesn't entirely. He's beginning to get it, but he still has lessons to learn. The next great trial that shows up for Job comes in the form of his friends. And his friends represent some of the deepest thoughts that go on within him. And he has three friends Doesn't really matter, but their names are Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar. And they come to him to argue with him or to make a case with him. You know, they say essentially, look, Job, you're our friend, been around a long time. These are some of the old ideas that he's had that are pretty valid ideas that he has kept pushing away, these friends. And we don't want you to get angry, but you're really blowing it here. And so they present an argument to him for being able to turn around and give him some good advice about the things that he ought to be able to be doing. It's excellent advice, it's logical, it's analytical, it all hangs together, but nothing really has much of an effect upon him. But Eliphaz, one of his friends, does make the comment to him that is sure to have taken root in him when he says, very simply, seek unto God. Turn away from all this, is what he's saying, and go to that source that exists within you. But even after all of the advice, while there might be that seed of illumination within him, he still doesn't understand. He doesn't have much humility. He's very self-righteous about it. He has a lot of self-pity. Look at all that's happened to me, and it's not my fault. Look what I've done. I've done all of this. What more do you want from me? He says to God. I like this, and I want to pause here just a moment because I have been in this teaching now for over 40 years, and I've been a minister for 37, I think, and taught a lot of classes and presented a lot of workshops and done a lot of things of that sort. And one of the things I found from people that they come into this teaching and they work with the teaching a while and they like it and they see a lot of possibilities, and then after a while I'll get comments like, you know, I've read all of the books, I've gone to all of the seminars, I've taken the courses, I've done this, I've done that, watch videos, da 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 da. This stuff just doesn't work. I could tell you stories about that. Friends of mine, one very famous minister friend of mine, religious science of mind minister, years ago. He was going through some real trials and tribulations, and we were off on a vacation, you know, our wives and us, and we were in Hawaii. I still remember us being in this hot tank, the hot tub, I guess you call it, and soaking, and well, he was kind of like in the hot tank, in this hot tub, and he was bemoaning all of these things that are going on in his life. This is a guy that had ministered to thousands, and every Sunday he would minister to thousands of people. A really, really big church. He says, you know, I've done all this stuff, and I finally come to the conclusion, it just doesn't work. Well, his life turned around. He lived the rest of his life very, very well. But this happens to us, doesn't it? We arrive at the point where we forget. We don't necessarily curse our source, but we disregard the fact that there is one life. That life is God. That life is my life, your life, and the life of everyone. To relax, to give ourselves over, and allow it to express in our life. Wow. But Job wouldn't listen. He was getting some indications, and he would vacillate. One moment it was though he slay me, I will trust thee forever. And then another he's saying, but I'll maintain my own ways. I got to do it my way. Him and Frank Sinatra. Okay? You know that song, I think. Finally, though, the light with Job begins to dawn. And it comes in the form of a new idea. Actually, in the book of Job, it goes like this. This is from a young man, a new idea. And the man's name is Elihu. And the Lord speaks to Job. Will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? That you are at fault. You're finding fault with all of these things. Are you going to contend with me, with the Almighty, the God? Let him who reproves God answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, my heavens, that's not really here. Behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to thee? I lay my hand on my mouth. He's arrived at that point where he's ready to shut up. That is, putting his hand over his mouth is to set aside all those things that have been expressing through him, that are ideas that come into his mind, and he has to say them that just perpetuate his limited experience of life. I lay my hand on my mouth. You see, human thought, conditioned human thought, obscures the spiritual thought or the spiritual expression that is constantly moving to come into our conscious awareness. But you see, the savings grace for Job through this whole trial is that he always acknowledges God as his source. He would never curse God. He'd never cooperate very well either, or give himself fully over to it. But what this does is it takes him to an opening of the way to be able to experience his return to wholeness. Now, he's already whole. It's just that he's put up such barriers around the recognition of it that he can't see it. But now he's ready to move in that direction where he can regenerate his awareness. And then we have, in finishing up this morning, some, where the heck is it? I've already gone past it. Yeah. We have the final statement. We have that one about, I put my hand over my mouth. And finally, in the very last statements here, or verses, there's one verse that gives you the summing up of the whole thing. Because at some point along the line in this story, he begins to regard others rather than just his own ego self, and actually prays for his friends. And the statement goes like this: and the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. Now, when I look at this story, I want you to understand I'm not taking this literally, nor saying that you have to do any particular procedure along the line. What I'm saying is that as we open ourselves and stop denying that there is a source to our being, we begin to open more and more to the processes of life, or us aligning with the process of life itself, which is always life. God as life in nature, in my experience, is constantly seeking to pour itself into my own activity and my own creation. But so long as I'm speaking my word of doubt, criticizing and denying, I cannot allow that to work in my life. So when Job finally lets go and puts his hand over his mouth, stops this kind of thinking and this kind of expression in life, he's restored. And his direction is toward the presence of God as the only reality of his life. And that's when love enters into his experience, because then he's able to pray for the other people that are in his life. And that prayer is an outpouring of something from within him, rather than a constantly striving to try to get what is going to complete him right now. So this is the story of Job. And if I were to summarize it in a few words, I'd put it this way, and this is the way it boils down for me. Many of us in life struggle long and hard with the issues of life. We protest enormously. And then at some point, we finally begin to become willing to let go. And when we are ready to let go, life expresses through us, and we discover that there is an inner state of being for each of us that doesn't depend on anything outside of us. We find that when we stop thinking about ourselves totally and start giving ourselves, praying for others is the way it's presented here. Praying for others, we open ourselves to receive the blessings of life in all of the variety that we could ever possibly imagine, that are going to help us to fulfill the reason for which we are here right now. That's the story of Job. Let go, let God. Put your hand over your mouth. Let's come together for a little prayer, shall we? Little healing prayer. Healing is another word for making whole. Holing is a way of putting it. There is one power, there is one presence, there is one essence, there is one love, joy, and peace. That is the power, the presence, the love, joy, and peace of that which made everything. And it is within that that we know that all harmony and balance pervades. There is a divine order to things, despite all of the activity outside of it. At this very center, there is a certainty. There is security. And this is the domain out of which healing occurs. Every one of us here today has something for which we would like to see a greater sense of balance and harmony. It may be in a relationship. It may be in a physical experience we are having. It may be a vocational challenge. It may be some very practical element in our life that seems to be out of sync with what we would like to see unfolding in balance and harmony, expressing love and joy. Whatever it is, bring this to the surface of your mind and say to yourself, within this that I consider to be an issue, there are the seeds of balance and harmony that express in alleviating any anxiety or any disturbance from it, transforming into a beautiful expression and experience of life. There is one life, and that life is God. That life is my life. That is the life of all. I accept right now, Spirit is as the operant influence in every aspect of my life, and know that all elements of my experience come together in a balanced whole, allowing the expression of who I am according to why I am here. I am whole. I am at peace. I am thankful. I am happy. And in this realization, we together declare, and so it is.